The Rams getting 2 corners, including Trent McDuffie, made them literally in Vegas Super Bowl favorites. So Jalen Watson's a good, solid corner, arguably better than anybody but McDuffie now on the Rams. But the Rams are not paying anybody on that defense for another year or two. They've drafted so well. They're very young, so they get a veteran that can match up with the top Niner, Arizona, and Seattle receivers in division and beyond. I love that move.
The arrival of free agency each year brings a certain level of chaos that makes covering the NFL both exhilarating and exhausting. We find ourselves scrutinizing every move, analyzing what each franchise accomplished or failed to accomplish, and attempting to assign meaning to transactions that may or may not prove significant months later. Danny from First Things First recently presented his annual Tiers segment, and I found myself reflecting on how we essentially force ourselves to participate in these conversations throughout the off-season simply because we need content to discuss. There is no way around it. The calendar demands discussion points, so we manufacture frameworks to evaluate teams at various checkpoints. How do we feel about teams entering free agency? How do we feel about them after the initial wave of signings? How do we feel about them heading into the draft? How do we feel about them once the draft concludes? The cycle continues relentlessly. The challenge involves maintaining consistent parameters for evaluation. Without structure, you can always defer judgment indefinitely. You can always default to the position that nothing truly matters until games are played. You can reserve final assessment until after the draft, or training camp, or preseason, or week 1. That approach lacks enjoyment because we want to discuss football in real time. At the same time, going to the opposite extreme and declaring Super Bowl champions based on March acquisitions creates its own problems. Balance proves essential. During a recent comment section exchange, someone presented a framework that resonated with me tremendously. The suggestion was to evaluate free agency through 3 simple categories: teams that got better, teams that got worse, and teams that stayed the same. I genuinely appreciate that approach. In fact, I am considering developing my own list organized around those 3 classifications. The prospect causes me some anxiety because I tend to dwell in the nuances. I am comfortable with complexity and prefer examining situations from multiple angles rather than forcing entities into rigid boxes. Categorization creates internal tension for someone who appreciates the weeds. Nevertheless, the framework offers clarity. Before proceeding, I want to emphasize that my current perspective will absolutely evolve as the off-season unfolds. These assessments remain fluid. Circumstances change, new information emerges, trades materialize, draft picks are made. With that caveat established, I believe the Las Vegas Raiders are conducting an exceptional off-season. They might even be having the best off-season in terms of overall activity and acquisition. The Max Crosby situation introduces some complexity, but broadly speaking, the Raiders are making positive moves. However, I do not anticipate the Raiders winning the Super Bowl. It would be an incredible story, but realistic expectations place them elsewhere in the competitive hierarchy. When I shift focus to franchises positioned to take meaningful steps toward championship contention, the Los Angeles Rams separate themselves from the field. They are, by a considerable margin, having the most impressive offseason when viewed through a Super Bowl lens. Free agency evaluation requires acknowledging that teams operate from vastly different starting points. Each franchise has distinct needs and varying distances from championship readiness. Imagine a scale from 0 to 10, where reaching 10 represents legitimate Super Bowl capability. Anything below 10 leaves you short of realistic contention. Some teams begin at 5 and climb 4 spots through free agency. That represents substantial progress. Other teams start at 7 and move up 1 or 2 spots. Still others sit at 9 and make a minor adjustment that pushes them to 10. The significance of moves depends entirely on context. There are also teams positioned at 8 that essentially stand pat, recognizing that available moves cannot meaningfully elevate them at this moment. For those franchises, simply avoiding regression constitutes a successful free agency period. Maintaining position at 8 preserves the opportunity to climb through draft additions or later transactions. Context determines everything. The Rams, from my viewpoint, entered the offseason as a clear 10. They could have run back the exact same roster that finished the previous season, identical in every respect, and I would have maintained absolute confidence in their championship capabilities. The foundational elements inspire that confidence. The structural integrity of the team, combined with the coaching staff's excellence, creates a situation where minimal alteration suffices. Running it back completely would have left my faith in the Rams undiminished. What makes their offseason exceptional is that they have exceeded that baseline. They were already operating at maximum championship readiness, yet they have managed to elevate further. They have moved from 10 to something beyond, perhaps 12 on our hypothetical scale. When a team already deserving of supreme confidence takes steps to become even stronger, the result is genuinely noteworthy. That is where I stand with the Rams. Other franchises have made solid moves. The Bills have executed nice transactions. The Ravens have improved their roster. Those moves matter within their respective contexts. But my confidence in the Baltimore Ravens has never reached the stratospheric level I hold for certain elite organizations. Even adding someone like Trey Hendrickson, which would represent a successful acquisition, does not fundamentally transform my perception of their championship viability. It moves them in the right direction, which is valuable, but the comparison point matters. When I force myself to choose between what the Rams are accomplishing and what the Chiefs are accomplishing this offseason, evaluated strictly through a Super Bowl lens, the distinction becomes clear. This brings me to an important conceptual distinction. Teams like the Raiders and Tennessee Titans occupy separate categories. They are building from minimal foundations. They might progress from 0 to 6 on our scale, which represents enormous relative improvement. That is genuinely exciting for their fan bases. The Rams, conversely, have limited room for growth but are maximizing every available opportunity within that constrained space. Consider the Kenneth Walker acquisition discussion regarding the Chiefs. That move will undoubtedly improve Kansas City. It addresses a need and adds talent. Chiefs fans expressed mixed reactions to my analysis, with many understanding the nuance while others defaulted to assuming negativity toward their team. The reality is that Walker represents a good move, even a great move for the Chiefs. But when I evaluate through a Super Bowl lens, when I consider Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes and the championship pedigree of that organization, I must ask whether Walker fundamentally alters their trajectory. Does that acquisition represent the difference between being a good team and being the relentless, dominant force we have witnessed in past seasons? For me, it does not. That same analytical framework applies to the Rams. They were already elite. They were already special. They have now elevated both their ceiling and their resilience. I have discussed this concept frequently because it offers valuable perspective. Tom Brady articulated something similar regarding offensive coaching, explaining how great coordinators increase the margin of error for their quarterbacks. I apply that same principle at the team level. Great organizations can either raise their ceiling, expand their margin of error, or ideally accomplish both simultaneously. These capabilities do not always align. Some teams can elevate peak performance while maintaining a narrow margin where mistakes prove costly. Other teams possess wider margins for error without exceptional ceilings, compensating through reliability across multiple phases. The Rams, in my assessment, achieved both this offseason. They widened their margin for error while simultaneously raising their peak. That combination explains why I ranked them as the ultimate Super Bowl favorite when various media segments required such designations. They possessed elite status already. They have now improved further. The natural consequence is heightened expectations. If the Rams fail to win the Super Bowl, the questions will come. How did this roster, with this coaching staff, with this quarterback play, with these defensive difference makers, fall short? Other franchises have faced similar scrutiny. The San Francisco 49ers have experienced it. The Philadelphia Eagles have experienced it. When the Eagles assembled their roster featuring Saquon Barkley, A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, that elite offensive line, that formidable defense, the expectation became championship or bust. Falling short necessitated answers. Such is the nature of these conversations, even while acknowledging the genuine difficulty of winning a Super Bowl. The Rams have assembled everything required. They possess elite coaching. They feature elite offensive talent. They benefit from elite quarterback performance. They deploy elite defensive playmakers. They have the necessary components. Having demonstrated the ability to utilize those components effectively, they now face the ultimate expectation. I cannot declare that the Rams made my favorite individual moves or generated the most dramatic numerical improvement on the scale from 5 to 8 or 9 to 10. What I can declare is that their off-season activities carry the most significant impact on actual Super Bowl viability. They have positioned themselves with expanded margin for error. When we examine championship odds, when we see numbers like 50 to 1 or whatever the case may be, we are essentially quantifying expected outcomes across multiple simulated seasons. If you run the season 10 times, how many times does each team emerge victorious? Off-season moves adjust those projections. The Rams have improved their odds meaningfully. For Los Angeles Rams fans, the current situation must inspire considerable optimism. The foundation was already championship caliber. The additions have only strengthened that foundation. The margin for error has expanded. The ceiling has risen. The expectation is clear. Those represent my thoughts on the Rams and their off-season positioning. Colin recently identified the Raiders as his top off-season story while ranking the Rams second. I am curious about your perspectives. What do you think about the Rams' approach? Are they your top off-season story when evaluated through a championship lens? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single response, whether agreement or disagreement drives your perspective. Let's generate meaningful discussion, perhaps even productive disagreement, while maintaining enjoyment in the conversation. Please consider subscribing if you appreciate this content. We are developing a community that I hope feels genuinely connected and invested. Your participation matters enormously. Remember to like this video as it supports visibility and algorithmic reach. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next discussion.